Okay.
Welcome everybody. Welcome to Fillmore Avenue. You know, the Constitution of May 3rd, 1791 seems like such a remote event. 230 years ago in Poland. Here we are across the ocean, and what relevance does it have to us today? Well, here's one piece of relevance. The people who built this place built it when there was no Poland on the map. So Poland was briefly on the map in 1791 when they had their own king. The Constitution was ratified. But people who came here in the late 19th century did not have a Poland, because shortly after the Constitution was ratified, it was considered to go so far in creating democratic reforms, perhaps not as democratic as we have now, but at the time it was a very radical proposition. So the Polish magnates, the ones who had huge tracts of land, and Russia became very threatened by the reforms that were enshrined in that Constitution. And just a little over a year later, Russia, in league with the Tsarkovisa, considered the traitors to the Constitution, attacked Poland. And then Poland did not gain independence until 1918, a year after this building was built. So in 1917, when this was built, World War I was still going on, and Poland had to wait a few months to regain its independence. The building in the back, the theater portion, was built in 1898, so even further away from an independent Poland. And yet, the people who built this were working class, young immigrants who cared about theater, who cared about culture, who cared about literature. That was what kept them Polish, their language and their attachment to their culture. And we can say that, okay, the Constitution was a failure. The attempt to ratify the Constitution was a failure, because a year later, Poland ceased to exist. However, that May 3rd Constitution inspired generations of Poles all throughout the fight for independence, and then throughout World War II. And then the communists, after World War II, forbade the celebrations of May 3rd Constitution Day, because they started to consider it a threat in the 1950s. Now, Karl Butzke, who's a great researcher, judge of the bankruptcy court in Buffalo, looks through old newspapers, Polonia newspapers. Until the late 1950s, we had a daily Polish language newspaper in this city. The Ample Eagle came in 1960, but Karl looks through the microfilms to see what happened on certain dates. And what he found was that in 1892, there were huge celebrations of May 3rd here on the East Side. May 3rd was such an important anniversary to people that they had a 3-day celebration that went through Monday. So they took a day off on Monday so they could go on to this day. That's how important it was for them. So in 1892, there was no Poland, but they still kept that as a symbol of inspiration. And many of them went back to Poland after Poland regained independence. So there's a lot to be proud of. And a few years ago, we got together here and said, you know, there's not much going on for May 3rd in Buffalo. In Chicago, there's an enormous parade. It's the largest celebration of May 3rd in North America. But in Buffalo, we kind of lost it. So Russell Pavlak, God rest his soul, David Franchik, a few others were here who said, you know, we should, doesn't matter which day of the week May 3rd lands on, we should at least get together and raise a toast to May 3rd Constitution Day. And so we've been doing that in a small group for anyone who wants to show up ever since then. And we've read the preamble, or parts of the preamble of the Constitution every night that we got together. The entire Constitution is about 11 pages long, but we read parts of the preamble. And basically what the Constitution did was it created a separation of powers. So the king with the council was the executive branch, judicial branch, and was separate from the executive branch, and there was a legislative branch of two houses, the Parliament, which in Polish is called the Sejm, S-E-J-M, and the Senate. And I'll read portions of this. The other thing it did was, while it talked about the primacy of the Roman Catholic faith in Poland, it also allowed protections and freedoms for all other faiths that were in the lands governed by the king. The preamble starts like this. In the name of God, one in the Holy Trinity, Stanisław August, the king at the time, by the grace of God, the will of the people, King of Poland and Grand Duke of Lithuania, Ruthenia, Russia, Mazovsha, Smooch, Kiev, Poland, Podolia, Podlassia, Livonia, Smolensk, Severia, and Chernihiv. Think of all the lands that Poland ruled over with Lithuania and the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth at the time. And 100 years before this, Poland was the largest power in Europe. And today, the presidents of Poland and Lithuania got together with the presidents of Estonia, Latvia, and Ukraine in Lithuania and talked about the May 3rd Constitution, and also talked about today's threat to those countries, which is, who is? We know the name, the R word, which never seems to change, right? So together with the Confederated States in dual number representing the Polish people, recognizing that the destiny of all depends solely upon the establishment and perfection of a national constitution, having by long experience learned the faults of our government, and desiring to take advantage of the season in which Europe finds itself in this dying moment that has restored us to ourselves, free of ignominious dictates of foreign coercion, holding dearer than life and personal happiness, the political existence, external independence, and internal liberty of the people whose destiny is entrusted to our hands, and desiring to merit the blessing and gratitude of contemporary and future generations. Despite obstacles that may cause passions in us, we do for the general welfare, for the establishment of liberty, for the preservation of our country and its borders, with the utmost constancy of spirit, ordained this Constitution, and declare it holy, sacred, and inviolable until the people, at the time by law prescribed, by their will recognize the need to alter any of its articles, to which the Constitution further states that the present same Parliament shall apply in everything. There's another important reform to remember. Prior to this Constitution, there was a concept called liberum veto. Any member of Parliament could stand up and say, I veto what was just passed. Not the king, any member of Parliament. So let's say a foreign power, who is our word, bribed a member of Parliament. He would stand up at their behest and say, this is all null and void. Or because of his caprice, or he was drunk or whatever reason. This got rid of that veto power. First clause, the dominant religion. The dominant national religion is and shall be the sacred Roman Catholic faith with all its laws. Passage from the dominant religion to any other confession is forbidden under penalties of apostasy. We don't have that in it. Inasmuch as that same holy faith bids us love for our neighbors, we owe to all persons, whatever persuasion, peace in their faith and the protection of the government. And therefore we guarantee freedom to all rights and religions in the Polish lands in accordance with the laws. Another thing to remember is that there was a nobility, there was a noble class. And many of us, before we started doing research, think we're all made up of nobility. While Poland did have a large noble class, most of us were of peasant stock, which is why we're here, right? Otherwise, we would stay with our lands. Now, some of the nobility did become impoverished, but the nobility back then attained equal rights with people in the town who were not necessarily part of nobility or old. The peasants. Both from justice, humanity, and Christian duty, as from our own self-interest properly understood, we accept, under the protection of the law and the national government, the agricultural folk, from under whose hand flows the most copious source of the country's wealth. We have to remember that at the time, the overwhelming majority of people lived on the land. The cities had a tiny minority, even into the 20th century. But there was a concept called serfdom. So people were serfs. They served at behest for very little recompense at the behest of the landowner. So this Constitution gave protections to the peasants against arbitrariness, arbitrary rule of the landowners. The king and the executive authority. No government, be it the most perfect, can stand without strong executive authority. The happiness of peoples depends upon just laws, and the effect of the laws upon their execution. Experience teaches that the neglect of this part of the government has filled Poland with misfortunes. Why does it say that? Because the magnates at the time were considered to be in a moral morass. They had so much money and so little care for the welfare of the nation. They were just interested in partying, getting drunk, eating as much as they could, and there was just a lot of ill repute going on at the time. So this Constitution sought to have a sober, in many ways, and a conscious executive authority. Judicial authority. It also enshrined the idea of getting the king's children, sons, educated, so that they would be invited to participate in the National Armed Force. The nation bears a duty to its own defense from attack and for the safeguarding of its integrity. Therefore, all citizens are defenders of the national integrity of the nation. The military are not but a defensive force drawn and ordered from the general force of the nation. And here are the signers of the Constitution. And you have some national Stanisław Dawid Malachowski, great crown, Reverend, listen to these mothers, you don't have to see them. Marshal of the Sejm and of the Confederation of the Crown Regions, Kazimierz, Prince Sapiega, General of Lithuanian Artillery, Marshal of the Confederation and of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, Józef Korwin-Kosakowski, Bishop of Livonia and Kurland, Chief Coadjutor of the Confederation of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, and Deputy Antoni Prince Jablonowski, Castellan of Russia. Goes on and tells us who the signers of this one were. Another local connection. A few years after Russia had taken control of Poland, the Poles had an uprising against Russia, led by Kościuszko, very often called the Kościuszko insurrection. And he was so important to the immigrants that a street is named after Kościuszko. And think of all the other streets that are named in Buffalo that people made sure were named after their heroes. They weren't only military heroes, but they could have been literary heroes like Mickiewicz Place, just down the street. Fredro in Kaisertown. Reitan in Kaisertown. Dave's a native of Kaisertown. What other names do you have?
Kraków,
Sobieski Street. Now, Sobieski Street, as you may know, was the location of the Polish National Catholic Church until they sold it to a mosque, a Muslim. For the longest time, were unaware of who Sobieski was or how he had defeated the Muslim Turks at Vienna. When they did find out, they appealed to Dave Franchik when he was councilman to change the name of the street. And Dave said, can't touch Sobieski, but you're more welcome to Sweet Avenue. You can change the name of that street. So, non-constitutional. Went from sweet to sour. Medina, actually.
Good job, Dave.
So, that's all for now. Let's keep the May 3rd anniversary alive from year to year and keep the inspiration that the Medieval Game alive. And let's try to get more people, wherever you go, talk about May 3rd to your Polish-American friends and family, but also especially to your non-Polish-American friends. You start hearing a Polish joke or what did Poland do, etc., etc. Thanks. Have a great time.
Thank you, Andy.
The club will be open now tonight, so come on by if you're around. Come on by. The club will be open till the last person leaves, so it'll be open till at least 10 o'clock tonight. So come on by if you're around. And Mr. Zahovich, your Mr. Zahovich is going to pass around some lyrics here now, so we can have us sing some singing here. Okay.
Part two of the program.
All right. Song is always a big part of our culture, especially in our native language. Let's sing a couple of songs that are very pertinent to today's date. First, we have the Mazurek Dąbrowskiego, the Polish national anthem. Of course, I'd like to point out, if I may take another 40 seconds, how the United States, the fledgling United States at the end of the 18th century is very similar to the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth during that time. Both had an elected executive, religious toleration, and of course the first and second constitutions in the world. However, the United States was separated by a great ocean from Great Britain, whereas Poland was surrounded by its rapacious neighbors, Russia, Prussia, and Austria, that sought to wipe it off the map of Europe. And thus in 1797, Józef Wybicki authored the Mazurek Dąbrowskiego, named after General Dąbrowski, who was leading Polish forces around Europe for your freedom and ours. The Poles fought with the Napoleonic forces, a whole other story. So still Poland has not perished. While we are alive, what the foreign power has taken, we will regain by sword. March, march, Dąbrowski. General Dabrowski from the Italian land of Poland. Under your leadership, guidance, give me a translation here, the nation will be reunited. So may we sing all 4 verses. Maybe just repeat the refrain once. Let's maybe get there. Ready? 3, 4.
Jeszcze Polska nie zginęła, kiedy my żyjemy. Co nam obca przemoc wzięła, szablą odbierzemy. Marsz, marsz Dąbrowski, z ziemi włoskiej do Polski. Za twoim przewodem złączył się z narodem. Druga zwrotka. Przejdziem Wisłę, przejdziem Wartę, będzie Polakami. Dał nam przykład Bonaparte, jak zwyciężać mamy. Marsz, marsz Dąbrowski, z ziemi włoskiej do Polski. Za twoim przewodem złączył się z narodem. Jak Czarniecki do Poznania po świeckim zaborze dla ojczyzny ratowania wrócił się przez morze. Marsz, marsz Dąbrowski, z ziemi włoskiej do Polski, za twoim przewodem złączył się z narodem. Już tam ojciec do swej baśni mówi zapłakany. Słuchaj jeno, pono nasi biją tarawany. Marsz, marsz Dąbrowski, z ziemi włoskiej do Polski. Za twoim przewodem złączy się z narodem. Marsz, marsz Dąbrowski, z ziemi włoskiej do Polski. Za twoim przewodem złączy się z narodem.
And the other song we have here, Witaj Majowa Jutrzenko, or Mazurek 3 Maja. The Mazurek of the 3rd of May, composed a few decades later, but nonetheless evoking the spirit of the May 3rd Constitution. Notice in the second refrain, Vivat Wielki Kołłątaj, Hugo Kołłątaj, one of the those who agreed and contributed to the making of the Constitution. But anyway, do we recall how this melody goes?
Witaj Majowa Jutrzenko, świeć naszej polskiej krainie. Uczcimy Ciebie piosenką, przy zabawie i przy winie. Witaj maj, piękny maj, u Polaków błogi raj. Witaj maj, piękny maj, u Polaków błogi raj. Niech braci naszych cisną, godność w ręku króla spała, a w ten 3 maj zabłysnął i nasza Polska powstała. Witaj maj, piękny maj, wiwat wielki kołłątaj. Witaj maj, piękny maj, wiwat wielki kołłątaj.
Thanks for singing along with us.
Thank you. Bravo. I have an announcement today.
It's not a 50 mic.
This flag is probably not, the shape of it, the condition of it is probably not something people hung in 1892. So Matt has been so kind as to lend his hat. Can we do a little collection for a new flag here?
I heard that, Dave.
There's nothing on it.
To złote. Proletariusze wszystkich krajów.
Do you know how many stories that flag has got? You know how, Andrzej, do you know how many stories